Hi, it's John, and welcome to the channel. It is 3 o'clock in the morning, Friday, November the 28th. I hope you're having a good sleep. I hope you have a good Friday when you wake up in 3 or 4 hours. I've got my big blue mug of coffee with me today, and I woke up this morning thinking about pipeline deals, the one that was signed between Alberta Premier Danielle Smith and Prime Minister Mark Carney yesterday. And I was thinking about the annual general meeting of the United Conservative Party, which starts today. That's Danielle Smith's party, for those of you who don't know. She may get a rude welcome when she shows up today, because the more you look into this deal, the worse it looks for Alberta. So I'm going to run over a few things in this for you. I had to write them down because there's a lot coming up real fast here. One, the Conservative Party of Canada has turned its back on Danielle Smith. It happened in question period yesterday. Two, the environmental groups are already lining up for a long battle against this pipeline. Three, Albertans have been betrayed with more carbon taxes. Four, there's no guarantee of a pipeline. Five, BC First Nation groups are getting ready for a fight. Six, David Eby is being David Eby. And number seven, high praise for a politician I despise, coming up at the end of this. All right? And in the immortal words of Lando Calrissian in The Empire Strikes Back, this deal is getting worse all the time. Let's start off with the Conservative Party turning its back on Danielle Smith, or at the very least, saying to Danielle Smith that you got a bad deal. Andrew Scheer in the House of Commons.
The Honourable Member for Regina Capel.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals killed the Northern Gateway pipeline project, making Canada more dependent on the U.S. Now this Prime Minister is putting on a big show, but he's setting up another process for a pipeline to fail, with new hurdles and hoops, and worst of all, a massive increase to the industrial carbon tax. The proposed pipeline is never going to happen because this Prime Minister is giving a veto to the BC Premier. But what is guaranteed to happen after April 1st is Albertans will pay a very real and very massive hike to the industrial carbon tax. Why is this Prime Minister more intent on hiking carbon taxes instead of building pipelines?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
It's perplexing to us over here why they keep talking about some supposed veto by the BC Premier when, in fact, of course, we will deal with the people and the province of British Columbia. But what they don't mention is the signature of the Premier of Alberta on a memorandum of understanding that commits us to consulting provinces, consulting First Nations, building out clean and renewable technologies, an electric grid, and building and creating opportunity for young Western Canadians for generations to come.
You have the Conservative Party of Canada condemning this deal that Danielle Smith, the Conservative Premier of Alberta, signed with Mark Carney and the Liberal Party of Canada. But even worse, she's being used by the other side to attack the Conservatives. Did you hear what McKinnon said there? Did you hear what he said there?
What they don't mention is the signature of the Premier of Alberta on a memorandum of understanding that commits us to consulting provinces, consulting First Nations, building out clean and renewable technologies, an electric grid, and building and creating opportunity for young Western Canadians for generations to come.
Let's get this straight. The Conservative Party of Canada and the Liberal Party of Canada are using the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, as a weapon against each other in the House of Commons. And did you see how the wording has changed here? McKinnon talks about consulting with BC and consulting with First Nations. Scheer says there's a veto. The Liberals say there's no veto. Carney said BC has to agree. First Nations have to agree to get a pipeline.
We believe the government of British Columbia has to agree. We believe the government of British Columbia has to agree. We believe the government of British Columbia has to agree. We believe that First Nations right holders in this country have to agree and support. All stakeholders have to back. All stakeholders have to back. All stakeholders have to back. That's one Canada.
What if they don't agree? There's no pipeline. That's a veto. Let's move over to this tweet here. Kirk Lubimov, here he is right here. You might want to follow him on X. I found his final summation of what happened yesterday, and he runs through all the different things here. quite telling and revealing. So Mark Carney got all the green agenda items he wanted, with Alberta's industries facing more costs. Insiders will line up their pockets from the irrational carbon capture stuff, the Pathways Project. The company is called Entropy, who are major suppliers of equipment for carbon capture, just happens to be a Brookfield company. Taxpayers will reward First Nations and be on the hook for all the risk, and maybe Alberta will get a pipeline one day if someone, private sector, wants to step up and still deal with all the headaches with final peanuts hitting taxpayers' pockets. Mark Carney already said that everyone, including BC and First Nations, have to agree, even though they have no veto. This beyond amateur of a deal that surrenders Alberta to Ottawa and the UN, all because of desperation of ribbon cutting by politicians instead of just getting rid of bad policies and get building. We move over here to Cameron Davies. Cameron is the head of the Republican Party of Alberta, so he wants to see a separate Alberta as well. Smith's UCP agreed to a 600% carbon tax increase for a pinky promise pipeline in 15 years, the definition of insanity. Franco Terrazzano from the Canadian Taxpayer Federation: a carbon tax hike is buried in the federal Alberta Memorandum of Understanding. Carbon tax on businesses will increase to $130 a ton. Here's Mark Carney talking about it.
But at its core is tightening the tier system, which is the industrial carbon price system here in Alberta, to a level of at least $130 with a past price from there. What does that mean? It means more than a 6 times increase in the industrial price of carbon, from its effective level, which is much lower than the headline level, the effective level, to the level that's committed in the agreement.
I'm sure Mark Carney is absolutely thrilled with this deal. He gets his carbon taxes, he gets all of his environmental regulations, he gets his net zero commitments, Alberta gets the shaft, we get more carbon taxes starting in April for a possible, maybe, pipeline in 15 years. How is this a good deal for us? This AGM this weekend for the UCP got real interesting about 18 hours ago when this deal was announced. I'm not a violent person. They may start throwing shit at Danielle Smith by the time we get to the opening of that. Don't do that. But she might have a rude awakening today. This is not a good deal for Alberta. Let's move on, because the stuff I talked about yesterday is already starting to happen. BC, NDP, Coastal First Nations slam pipeline deal between Ottawa and Alberta. I'll read a little bit. BC's governing party and Coastal First Nations have come out firing against the new agreement between Ottawa and Alberta that paves the way for one or more bitumen pipelines from the oil sands to BC's north coast. It goes on to talk about David Eby saying that this deal will damper deals he's already got going on in British Columbia, that there's no proponent for it, there's no investor. Do you think anybody's going to invest in this with all the uncertainty that's still involved here? No! That's the most important thing. Okay, so we'll move on here to the First Nations. Some First Nations in the region have been clear about their opposition. Marilyn Slett, president of the Coastal First Nations Great Bear Initiative and the elected chief of the Heiltsuk Nation, said she and the 9 other First Nations that make up the coalition are planning their next move, which could include legal action. She said that the group plans to use every tool in its toolbox to make sure the pipeline is never built, and that the tanker ban on BC's north coast isn't weakened. Meanwhile, the environmentalists are getting involved. Lots of money behind that, folks. Environmentalists also already out in full force with 41 organizations, including EcoJustice, Greenpeace, and Stand.Earth, calling the project little more than a pipe dream. Nice play on words. Here's Peter Julian. Peter is a former, he's a former NDP MP for New Westminster in British Columbia, the former NDP House Leader, and you're going to see a lot more of this, folks.
Say no to Mark Carney's vampire pipeline project. It sucks away our pristine environment on the north coast of British Columbia. It sucks away Indigenous rights. It sucks away, potentially, tens of thousands of jobs in the fisheries and tourism that depend on our pristine environment. The number is enormous, 1 million barrels a day coming through the north coast. For a fraction of that amount, with the Exxon Valdez, the Alaskan coast was polluted for decades. We need to stand as British Columbians against this pipeline project, say no to tankers on the north coast of BC, and say no to Mark Carney's vampire pipeline project.
Interesting wording at the end there from Mr. Julian. I think he called it Carney's vampire pipeline. I hadn't heard the word vampire used like that. Maybe you had, but it was in the article from earlier. This is David Eby. The bottom line for us is that we need to make sure that this project doesn't become an energy vampire with all of the variables that have yet to be fulfilled, said the Premier. Energy vampire. Now, what he's talking about here, as you probably know, Eby said that if you put a pipeline through, support for other major projects that have already been announced, including an LNG project worth, I think, $1.7 billion, that support for that may be pulled. This may be the angle they take to kill the Alberta to the West Coast pipeline. They get a native group that says, we're pulling our support for this project that's already been announced. Eby goes to Carney and says, look what's happened. I told you. And then the pipeline dies. Now, I only hope that Premier Smith has assurances that if the pipeline dies, everything else dies with it, including the carbon tax, which comes in April. The putting the carbon dioxide in the ground project that costs $10 to $20 billion, and a commitment to net zero and all the other nonsense that this deal has with it. Now, I don't go on X very often, but I tweeted out this yesterday. This is AI's best approximation of Danielle Smith waving around a pipeline deal. People who know history might know my reference here, peace in our time. For those of you who don't, Neville Chamberlain declares peace for our time. Here he is waving around the Warsaw Pact prior to the Second World War. What I'm referring to here, by the way, before you start going off on a tangent, is appeasement. That's what I'm referring to here. Now, I do have some rare praise for somebody I despise. I think is a dangerous man. I think he's a threat to our way of life. I think the man's a criminal. This guy. People were loving this yesterday. Stephen Guilbeault resigning from cabinet in protest over Carney's pipeline deal with Alberta. You can say anything you want about this guy, and I would agree with it. Say as nasty as you want, but at least he has the strength of his convictions. And you might find, now he's still in the Liberal Party. He's just resigned his cabinet position. It's not as if he's resigning his seat and there has to be a by-election. The Conservatives might pick up a seat. That's not the case, but you might see more Liberals doing exactly the same thing. This is not a good deal for Alberta. I'm not happy with this. The UCP AGM just got even more interesting, and it was going to be interesting, but boy, has it got more interesting. And again, like Lando Calrissian said in The Empire Strikes Back, this deal is getting worse all the time. Thanks for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel. Onward and upward to 42,000 subscribers. For those of you who have already subscribed, thanks so much, and I will see you in the next one.